I'm Leah James, and this is the Traveling Table Dinner Series. In this series, I hope to bring strangers around the table to have meaningful conversation and connection. They get to leave and go back into their real life with different perspectives and thought processes and awareness so that we engage with people in a new and better, more inclusive way. So tonight we have a group of people who are coming together with the underlining theme that they're all tied to access to education. All right, so the table's set, and I'm really excited to see how everyone connects with each other. The best part is that they always surprise me, so let's see what happens. Thank you all for joining tonight. I'm Leah, and you all are joining us for the next episode of the Traveling Table Dinner Series. I would like us to just go around the table and introduce ourselves again to each other. So if you'll start here.
I'm Damien Kinsey. I'm originally from New York City, and I currently live in Maryland and work in the DC area.
Hi everyone, I am Teresa. I live right now in Wendell, which is a small town outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, but I'm from Virginia originally.
I'm Lanisha, and I'm a lover of people. I love espresso. I'm a mom. I'm an entrepreneur, and I live currently in Silver Spring, and I work in the DC metro area.
I'm Eliza. I live around the corner. What is this, Parkville?
I'm Andrew. I'm a transplant to Baltimore. I grew up all over the place, but I claim Alaska as home. That's the place I spent the most time when I should have been growing up.
So you each chose a question at the beginning when you came in, and I'm going to ask you to read the question aloud, answer it, and then ask someone else to answer it with you. Andrew, do you want to kick us off with your question?
Sure. So the question that I pulled from around the room is, how do you meet new people? Which I think is very much in line with the whole premise of this place and this space that you've created here, Leah. One of the things that is also that I found particularly interesting is not talking about work, or at least not as directly talking about title, profession, and some of that. And I was thinking about this earlier, but so often if we lead with that, it makes the relationship more transactional, perhaps, because you're then starting to calculate what is this person's potential benefit for something you're working on in some sort of way. Yeah, there's an act of transaction that is being calculated when you're leading with like what your title and role is. And yet I find that for me, so much of what I do is work. Like I have a full-time job, and then I have a part-time volunteer job on top of that. And so I do a lot, and that is how I meet people and how I interact with people, is through my work. I'm not an extrovert, but I've learned to become one if there's something that I'm passionate about wanting to see happen. But Lanisha, I was curious about something you said earlier, because you talked about being both an extrovert and also how much is outside of work. So I often don't feel like I know how to meet new people, except through work. And I'm curious what advice you would give and how you would answer the question, how do you meet new people?
Oh, interesting. I do it mainly online. In the pandemic, I had this really wonderful audio-only app, Clubhouse, and that app was like on fire. It's beautiful because I'll be breastfeeding my son, dealing with the 2-year-old, and then if you're on Zoom, that's not good. No.
Make it real.
Exactly. But on the phone, it's wonderful. So I got to connect with people, and I prefer that, like talking on the phone, or just I like that. And then it helped me get a sense of who people were without. I mean, it wasn't safe to go out. I didn't even go to the grocery store. I was pregnant for most of the early days of the pandemic. Then I had the baby. Then I was super isolated. So I wasn't meeting any people. I didn't go out. Like, I would go to my doctor's appointments, and then I had the baby in the hospital. I got out of the hospital, and I only went to we did virtual visits for the baby. The doctor said, get your own scale and weigh the baby because they're really worried about that if you're breastfeeding and if the baby's not getting enough nutrients and food. And like, I was like, wait, what? And they're like, yeah, FaceTime us or do whatever, but email, put it in my chart, the weight. And I was like, this is weird because that's not how we should be interacting. So I started using LinkedIn more, and then I started using this Clubhouse app because I prefer some kind of interaction where you can really get a heartfelt sense of a person, and you really can't do that only chatting. Even though I kind of remember the AIM days, the AOL, like back in the day, like you're like chatting with some random person potentially, but I mean, they were real people. And that's how I meet people now, even now, because I loved going to conferences and traveling, but it's sometimes not safe. And so, yeah.
Well, and when you're in those conversations, are you leading with the work that you are doing or the work, or what are you leading with?
No,
Like what starts the conversation, I guess?
If I'm reaching out to a random person, I always look for something to connect on about who they are. Like, who are they as a human in the world? So they typically will say they like traveling if they don't like traveling. Or I will see that they have some indicators of what they want, because everyone's putting their business on Front Street on social media. I mean, you can really tell somebody's psychological state from just observing. You don't even know them. If you pay attention, you can see that. And so you can kind of like glean, okay, these people, if people really love travel, they're always, even they're not going anywhere, they're always posting about that. Or they have dogs, or they have coffee in their shots, or they like books, they have it there. And those are things I'm attracted to. So then I like want to talk about that with them. And whenever someone does it back, like I do it to them and they're like, well, what do you do? What's going on? My response is always like, I'm just in the world. And they're like, what? What? You're in the world. What does that mean? I'm like, well, I am. And so let's talk about something. And I like talking about things philosophically or deeply meaningful to, like we have a connection between our military backgrounds, even though you were born in another country, right? And I don't know that much about you, but just a little bit. And we have this shared kind of experience. But the details of like, you're a dad of how many kids? 3 kids, and you have a wife or a husband?
Wife. Yeah.
You have a wife, and then I don't know any details. But do I need to know those details? I just care that you're fully you in this moment with me, and we can find a way to connect. The work and stuff is irrelevant. I mean, it's relevant because it's how you do your life, but it's not for this. And so that's how I think of life, really.
And I think that's so fascinating how you just like broke down the pieces that were like interesting and relevant to you and how you connect on that. And I think what's fascinating is eventually you'll talk about your work and you're more likely to make a bigger impact because you have a different connection, right? Because you're going to do, if you connect really deeply continually, you're going to do whatever it takes to like make the other person shine, right? To some degree. And it probably will extend beyond work. It'll be like personal. It'll be like in life things. You'll just think about someone. Like when we connected, yes, we connected on work, but like I think about you for certain things that have nothing to do with like curriculum. So we connected based on nonprofit stuff, specifically for youth. But when we connected, I was traveling, I was in Oregon, and we talked about you being in New York or from New York. Mm-hmm. And I was sharing that my real dream was to copyright my curriculum for career development and share it with more people so more people had access to it. And he checks in with me every so often. He's like, have you copyrighted it yet? Still haven't.
Wow.
Still haven't.
Way to hold her accountable.
Yeah, but like, I mean, I think it's like stuff like that where that's not my job, right? It's not my title. It's something I just care really deeply about, people having access to living full lives and doing things that they care about. And it's something I want to do, but it's not my, so you just support each other differently. I feel like when you connect based on heart and energy.
Well, maybe the thing that I'm reflecting on, thinking about from this question, and then I do want to hear other questions that folks have, is that when you have multiple touch points, we'll say, or multiple ways that you're interacting with somebody, you have a different relationship. If you lead, you likely get to work even if you don't lead with work. But if you lead with work, then maybe it undermines some of the authenticity or the perception even of authenticity of your other conversations, because if you're wondering if that person is wanting to be friends with you because of something that is more transactional in nature, then you're now, everything else is sort of cheapened by that potential. But if you don't start with that, if you don't lead with that, you develop a relationship outside of that, and you have, ways that you connect that aren't as based in work.
Yeah. But I wonder if that then makes it like, do any of you have like lifelong friends that you're still friends with? Yeah, deep friendships. How does that then reflect on work? I'm gonna flip it for a second. Like, do you know what your lifelong friends do? Do they know what you do? And can you collaborate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my lifelong friends, I've had them come for career day. Like I have a friend who I've known since high school, and that's a story for another day.
We're not gonna talk about high school friends.
He and I, story for another day. And I had another friend, my best friend, she's I've known her since 14. We became really good friends in like our 20s. And the thing about both of them, I was able to get them to come talk at career day. And I know what they do, and I've come to their jobs also to support them. But it isn't about the job, it's about the relationship and the energy. That's why they're still friends with me. Which can segue to my question in my paper. But it's the same thing with you and I, it's about the energy. When we connect and we have a conversation, it was about work, but I wanted to support you, not because it was anything you could do for me and vice versa. So it kind of was like, so when I do check in with you to see if you're okay, how's everything going, and are you working on that project, it's just to see how you're doing necessarily.
Yeah.
Not about the actual work.
And that came through, just so you know. Like, I think that's why I've continued to stay in touch with you, is because like it was really clear that you just like genuinely wanted to connect and that it wasn't transactional. Like, it was clear that our work crossed over, but you weren't just trying to say like, hey, let me trade you this for that, right? And I think that's what like changes a friendship or a dynamic or something like that, which I think is really cool. Do you want to read your question?
Yeah, segues right into my question.
Okay.
What is the biggest lesson you learned in the last year? Going back to the conversation we're having, I've learned about the evolution of relationships. Some relationships you have with individuals when you were younger aren't the same you have now. Even with family, friends, co-workers, and even with the interactions on the internet with like LinkedIn and other things. So it just evolves. And the pandemic has taught us that the relationships, the conversations have evolved from virtual to in person. I met a lot of people in different countries, different places, and I had the opportunity to learn about different fields that I wouldn't have access to. So it's the complete evolution of relationships and myself as well. Merry Christmas.
Oh, gosh. And as the craziest part is as you were talking, I'm like, I don't know how I would answer this question. So of course, I think you like felt that vibe.
That's
You're like,
perfect.
you need to answer this
Well,
question.
you have a lot to talk about.
Oh, do I?
Children, the journey up here.
Yeah, the drive, yeah. Driving. Oh gosh. Okay, the biggest lesson that I've learned in the last year. I mean, my mind instantly went to having a kid because kind of to both of your points that children, I mean, just change you, whether it's a pandemic or not a pandemic. That is a paradigm shift in what you think is important and kind of how you live your life. I'm trying to think of the biggest lesson that came along with that is, I think for me, it's going to sound like a complete cliche, but it's kind of the what's important in life. So it's a little bit tied into the pandemic, a little bit to do with having a kid, or maybe just maturing as you get older and kind of think about, now I'm going to maybe get into like the second half of my life eventually, like what am I actually doing? And I don't think we think about that when we're younger or 20s. You're kind of just in the moment. So that's maybe been the biggest lesson. And I have no answer to that bigger question. Like, what the heck am I doing? If I'm existing, I don't know that I can define that just yet. So kind of starting that journey and then worrying at points that maybe I'm a little late, or stressing like, did I start addressing this question early enough, which sounds so silly, when you're 36 years old, to be like, is it too late to think about what the heck am I doing on this planet? And like, am I doing it right? Am I doing what I want to do? So yeah, wow, we just took a long walk back to the point, that's probably been the biggest lesson, is giving yourself permission to explore. Like, what am I doing here? Who am I when I don't define myself by my job? And what do I do with that information? I don't know.
It's a good answer. It's deep.
That was
So many layers.
I know. You scared me with this big question. So.
I'm curious, like, how does that make you feel, saying that you don't know where you are right now?
That's a good question. If you had asked me that 10 years ago, it probably would have been a panic attack or some sort of like big emotion. And I don't know why I'm okay with it right now. I just am. Like, I'm okay not knowing the answer. And maybe that's because I have met people like you and other people like you all around the table who I feel like are just really like authentic, and it's okay not to know the answer. Or a lot of people have career pivoted and not, they survived to tell the tale. So I feel kind of emboldened by the brave ones who went before me, for sure.
Of navigating.
I think it's natural to think about that. Where do you go? What's your evolution? I think about like my parents and other people who were like my age when I was younger. And you think about and have those conversations, be like, well, I went through this, so I'm explaining to you what the road is. And I find myself thinking the same thing with the younger generation that I work with or work around. Like, what's next and what's your evolution? I had a conversation with someone that was like, what's your end game? And I was like, huh? What do you mean? I'm alive. So they were asking me like, what do you want to see yourself in 20 years? And I thought about it, and I kept thinking about, and I was like, if you asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have thought the path is this way. But now, as I got older, I've seen things a little bit different. Just starting to think of that. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying about where you at, and I'm kind of the same thing. I think you're at peace. I'm at peace also, because I'm just excited about where the journey is going to go.
What I find interesting about both of your answers is there's like crossover with like you looking at and prioritizing relationships and like the real value of the relationships. And then Teresa, with you saying, you're not really sure where you're going. Is it too late for you to ask those questions? And I think that relates to relationships and like the dynamics of people in your life, people that you're surrounded by. That's part of what's bringing you peace right now. So I just think it's interesting how your answers also dovetail into each other a little bit, or feed back and forth to one another.
It's also mortality. Like, I start thinking about, like, I had this conversation with my sister about checking in a little bit more, because when our parents eventually go, we are all who we have, and it's important to make sure we continue to foster that relationship, because it's easy to live your life and then lose touch or get swallowed up in what's going on with you. So it's important. Those relationships are really important. Just thinking about how to maintain them.
So how does your
perception of mortality impact the relationships? What does that look like?
Energy. It depends on what my energy is shifted towards now. I think I have high low tolerance for certain behaviors and interactions around me. So I used to hear people talk about value of relationships. Is this person bringing value to your life or not? And I always used to think that I don't need value in the relationship. This person doesn't need to give me anything to have the relationship with them. It's about me giving to them. And I've learned a little bit that sometimes you have to understand who's not giving you back. Are they doing more harm than good? So I've kind of looked at it like, I have X amount of time on this planet, and certain individuals, if they're doing more harm in a relationship, I might need to give them a timeout. A long timeout.
Yeah.
I'm not blocking their calls, but they're getting a timeout.
But I wonder how much do we know that we have X time on the planet?
I don't know, so that's why they're getting a timeout.
I got you. In the context of mortality, I just was thinking about that when what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe this point about time and thinking about us as like time travelers as we go through life, we are traveling through time. Like the relationships we have with certain people, imagining back in time, right? So the thought experiment of, for example, a parent or an older sibling, imagining where they were at your age now, right? Can kind of shift what you're feeling right now and saying, oh, I understand them differently because I think back to where they were when they were my age, and I now have a just appreciation for what they might have been going through in a way that when you're younger, you maybe just expect them to know more, have things more figured out, for example, or just, I don't know, you just have a different expectation. And you're like, wait a second, I'm that age now, and I'm here, and these are the things that I'm struggling with, or I'm trying to figure out. But I guess just that point of like, we don't know how long we have, and yet we all still are traveling through time in, it's a one-way street.
I would love to hear your take on it since you have like two younger ones.
I really resonated with what you just said. I think when I was little, I used to think that my parents, there's like kids and there's parents, and kids don't know anything and parents know everything. And that was sort of like the perspective I had. And now being a parent, I look back and I realize like my parents were just doing their best. And I'm doing my best and I'm making mistakes, and I try to communicate that to my kids. I have a 2-year-old and she's like very curious about everything, and I try to tell her like I'm having a hard time right now, or I'm upset, or just be human with her. And I think that goes a long way with her, but realizing that my parents did the best they could, and we're not perfect, and we're also just trying to figure out who they were and where they fit in the world and what they wanted with their life. And I was like becoming me in that, and it's very different than it felt in that moment.
Did your parents model? I love that you say I'm vulnerable with my kids, and I would try to do that as well. Did your parents model that for you, or do you think when you were growing up they tried very hard not to expose you to them struggling to?
Yeah, I think that they tried not to expose me, but that's impossible. I remember the first time I saw my mom cry, and I don't have a great memory, so I couldn't have been younger than 7 or 8. And I remember being just totally blown away by that. Like I remember the couch she was sitting on. I remember how I felt when I opened the doorway. I remember her being surprised that I walked in, and I felt like I walked in on something I shouldn't have. And I remember feeling like embarrassed, almost like I walked in on her naked or something. Yeah, and my 2-year-old has definitely seen me cry.
Preach.
You know, last week I was crying and she came in and she said, "Are you sad?" And I said, "I am sad, but I'm not mad at you." And later she came back to me and she said, "Are you still sad?" And I said, "No." So she, you know, I think trying to model those feelings to her, and she a friend of mine recently said, "Does she talk about her feelings as often?" I remember being little and having feelings and just being like, where do I put this emotion? I don't even know what it is, and having such a hard time like processing and letting those things out. And if I had known, and this is not at all a knock on my parents, again, they were doing their best, but if I had known how to say like, I'm feeling overstimulated, or I'm feeling sad, or that hurt my feelings and I just need to cry. Like if I had been able to name those things as a kid, I think, you know, they would have played out in really different ways. My parents' shoes really resonated with me, and I've been thinking about that a lot when I am trying to be more vulnerable with my own kids.